everybody, Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with JJ Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. It's so great to have you here with us on this Friday. My name is JJ Jackson, and I proudly serve as the host of this Locked On Blue Devils podcast. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor today, Underdog. Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com with the promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Locked On Blue Devils, a daily podcast and YouTube show each and every day, 5 days a week, talking about everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. If you haven't done so already, follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils, and you can follow me on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. On today's show, we're going to discuss the Duke football team going for their second ACC victory of the year against Georgia Tech, and we're so excited to be joined by our buddy Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated. Conor, here we are. We look at the calendar. Basketball season is on the horizon, and here we are with 5 games now completed for this Duke football team. Thanks for the time today, and I hope you're doing well.
Doing great.
Let's get to it. Let's talk about this Duke football team. First ACC victory in 13 tries this past week against Virginia. They hadn't defeated the Cavaliers since 2014. A lot of boxes were checked, a lot of firsts for this Duke football program, and that was something fun to see for Blue Devil fans.
Yeah, that was a game that I think I went into it not expecting anything in particular. I mean, if either one won by a lot or if either one lost by a lot, you know, that kind of thing, close game, whatever happened, I was not going to be surprised. But Duke pretty much controlled the entire game. Like it seems so simple when Duke gets out to a 20-something-0 lead. Yeah, they're pretty good. They get to run the ball. Their defense can kind of play with everything, keeping it in front of them. So they're 4-0 in games that they get out at least 21-0. It's a nice little recipe they've got going.
It's funny. You get a 3-touchdown lead. All of a sudden, you've got a little bit of confidence. You've got that cushion that you can play with. And we've seen that a couple of times already this season for Duke football. When you look back and looking at these first 5 games of the year, what in particular is this Duke football team doing, Conor, that is allowing them to get off to such a great start to games?
It's the balanced offense to me. They can hit you in a lot of different ways offensively, whether it's getting the ball out in space to guys like Jalen Calhoun, Jordan Moore, or whether it's pounding you into the ground with Jalen Coleman and Jordan Waters. That was kind of the way they jumped all over Northwestern early. There's so much more balanced of an offense than I think what people, myself included, thought they would be this year. I kind of had an idea of their running backs were really good and their offensive line could push some people around. They're big and physical. I did not know that they'd be able to throw the ball the way that they're able to throw it. The Virginia game isn't the best example of that. I think Riley Leonard had his season low in passing yards, but when he did throw it, it was efficient. And that's what you want when your running game goes for 200 plus. The other part of the equation is Riley Leonard's running ability, right? Everybody looks at a 6'4" quarterback and thinks that, you know, he's going to be a little more of a pocket passer. He's got some speed and elusiveness in the open field. And everybody talks about when you're in college football, if you can run your quarterback, it takes away the defense's extra hat. That's all the football lingo.
Yeah.
And they can run Riley Leonard and feel good about running him.
Yeah, you think about this game in particular, looking back at last week's win over Virginia, and while we do compliment Riley Leonard and his running ability, I think if you were to ask anybody going into it, you mentioned really not having expectations going into that first conference tilt. But if you were to tell somebody, hey, Riley Leonard is going to be held to under 150 yards passing, do you think Duke wins this football game? I wouldn't believe somebody if they said, yeah, I could see Duke winning this football game, just because we hadn't really seen that so far this year, and yet they walk away able to do that.
Yeah. Jalen Coleman and Jordan Waters really separated themselves. I mean, I went into the season thinking they could play 4 running backs if they needed to. No team really wants to have a rotation of 4. The most you can really get and keep happy and keep in a rhythm is 3. And really, it kind of gets tricky when there's 3. So you want you to separate themselves, and that's what Coleman and Waters have done. We'll have to keep an eye on the Georgia Tech game because Jalen Coleman came kind of hobbled off the field there at the end of the Virginia game. You could even see in the post game interview with Coach Elko, Jalen Coleman is kind of limping off the field. So we'll see if he's good to go. Like Mike Elko didn't say that he's out long term. He did provide that update for 2 key backups on defense, Anthony Nelson and Trey Freeman. So Jalen Coleman, they think is going to play, but if he's not able to go, it'll be the Jordan Waters and Jaquez Moore show. And Jaquez Moore, all he did after kind of, he's fallen a little bit out of the rotation, he gets a carry at Virginia and goes 59 yards for a touchdown. So he's clearly ready to go if they need him this weekend.
Really exciting stuff for sure with this Duke football team. I want to talk a little bit about the defense. They had a 21-point victory against Virginia. Let's give that defensive unit some love. And we're going to do that after our first time out here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. It's the easiest place to spice up college football. This is why I like Underdog Fantasy so much. It's easy to play and available in over 30 states. Just pick between 2 and 5 players across any team, not just on Duke, and decide if they will finish higher or lower. For example, take a quarterback like Riley Leonard, higher or lower passing yards than the number provided at Underdog Fantasy. It's one of the easiest fantasies to play games out there, and you can win cold hard cash in just a single game. Sign up with promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Deposit $100, get $100 free. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or find the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store and Google Play Store. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On. Get in on the college football pick'em action today. Moving forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, I'm JJ Jackson, alongside my buddy Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated. Let's talk about that defensive unit for Duke. A lot of praise for the offense so far, but let's talk about that defensive bunch.
Yeah, Duke's defense, they're playing really well. I'm a little hesitant to heap praise on them. I think Virginia's offense is that much of a train wreck.
It's probably fair.
Look, yeah, their depth is wearing a little thin. That's kind of an area of concern. Like Anthony Nelson, the defensive end I mentioned, is the grad transfer from Harvard. He's given them a lot of quality snaps this season behind VJ Anthony and RJ Oben. So it's worth keeping an eye on that unit. Now, they're not playing world beaters in Georgia Tech's offense, right? Like Georgia Tech didn't have a touchdown until the last 11 minutes against Pitt last week and managed to win that game. I like the way that Shaka Hayward is kind of getting a little more attention. He's been a really good linebacker for a couple years, but it's been overshadowed by the defense as a whole's lack of production, so to speak. So it's really good. Like the Reese Senior Bowl shouted him out for, I think, a 13 tackle performance against Virginia. He was really good. And Darius Joyner, how can you not like Darius Joyner? That guy is a treat. A hard-hitting safety. He's a ball hawk. He finally got his hands on the ball with an interception. He's playing some really good football for them.
And Darius Joyner talking in the media a little bit earlier about how much he would be able to contribute to that Duke basketball team, giving them 35-10 and wanting to spell Jeremy Roach out there on the floor as well. Yeah, what a fun personality. And a lot of people wondering, you transitioned from an FCS school to Division I Power 5 football in the ACC. What's that going to look like? And it's interesting. The secondary was kind of the bigger question that we had about the defensive unit for Duke this season. And that hasn't been an issue so far for the Blue Devils this year.
Yeah, I told Duke's athletics communications person after the first time we interviewed Darius this season, it was back in August, that anytime they wanted to make him available for an interview would not be a problem. It was clear he was going to have something exciting, interesting, entertaining to say. And so I'm glad everybody that got that ACC PM clip got to see that also, because he told us the same thing. 35-10 off the bench if John needs him. But yeah, the secondary, like Jalen Stinson is the only returner who played significant snaps last season, and he's been really good. Brandon Johnson at the nickel spot, that's been the key spot to me. That was, you ask me what the biggest difference is between the defense last year under Cutcliffe and the defense when Mike Elko comes in, is that fifth defensive back on the field has become a nickel corner instead of a third safety who you can drop into the box and who can blitz. That's what it was under Cutcliffe, and that needed to change because ACC teams run 11 personnel a lot. That means that they're running one running back, one tight end, and three receivers, and that third receiver is going to be a slot receiver, and that guy is going to be really twitchy, really elusive, really, really good in small spaces. So Brandon Johnson, to me, his ability to make sure tackles, to cover in the slot, to hold up in run defense is huge, and it's really allowed that defense to be a lot more sound than they were last season when they were giving up the most yards in the country. So Brandon Johnson emerging, there was one stretch where he had Duke had forced 4 fumbles. He had a hand in 3 of those 4 with interception and a fumble recovery against Northwestern, and then I think forcing a fumble against A&T. Like he's really allowed the secondary to play a lot more free, a lot better to simplify things. And he's a big reason that Duke's defense is kind of far removed from the numbers from last year that had them last in the country in yards allowed per game.
Which is what we like to hear. I mean, you like to hear of guys stepping up when needed. You like all the changes across the sport in college football. You mentioned how versatile those slot guys can be, and you need somebody to step up to that task, and it's been Brandon Johnson for the Duke defensive unit. So now we turn our attention to tomorrow's game. Duke travels to Atlanta. They're going to take on Georgia Tech as the season continues along, and this Duke football team continues the home away trend to their schedule for the entire year. This Georgia Tech squad had a head football coach already fired this season. What can we expect out of the Yellow Jackets, do you think, Conor?
That's the thing that I just wrote in the preview that'll publish today. It's like there's so much about this game that is dependent on Georgia Tech variables to me, and one of the main ones is, does the Georgia Tech emotional response to Jeff Collins firing carry into a second week, or was that all last week? Did they get all of that out of their system last week, and do they kind of revert to the same team they were in the first 4 games of the year? Now they played some really good teams in those first 4 weeks. Don't get me wrong, like Clemson and Ole Miss are 2, really good teams to start your season against. So that's one of the ones that I really want to see. I think the first few minutes of the game will kind of tell the story there. Like, not only will it answer whether Duke is able to get out to another one of those big leads that let them play from ahead for an entire game, but it'll tell us if Georgia Tech is kind of amped up in the same way that they were last weekend, or whether they kind of come back to earth in kind of their emotions are more in check.
Yeah, with this Georgia Tech squad in particular, you kind of mentioned how wide open the Coastal Division has been in the ACC this year. Georgia Tech turned a lot of heads with that emotional victory last week against Pitt. No one really gave them a chance. And so I think the emotional high is something important to kind of point out there. And then you look at what's next for Duke after this one. You can't get too far ahead, but it's a game that you like to play, projecting what this division could look like. You've got the big matchup with North Carolina next week. And so if Duke, going into the year and how the season started, were to kind of pick their first few conference opponents, I think you would have chosen Virginia, Georgia Tech, and North Carolina to start out with, just to kind of be a measuring stick and pick up a little bit of confidence before they go throughout the back stretch of their schedule.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me going into the season that Duke would, I mean, regardless of this result, if that Duke would be 4-2 or 5-1 going into that Carolina game,
right,
I would have said that's kind of a best case scenario. I would have, I didn't see the Virginia collapse coming, but yeah, I mean, Duke is overachieving. I don't think it's disrespectful to say that. Like, maybe it's disrespectful if I'm in the team and I'm in the summer workouts and seeing those things, but I'm not. So just from my outsider's perspective, it is an overachieving season already so far for Duke. Now the question is how far can you take it? I mean, the Coastal, like you said, the Coastal is so wide open. Miami, North Carolina this weekend is going to probably tell who is the front runner for the division in the last half of the season. And Duke, if they beat Carolina, no matter if Carolina wins or loses against Miami, Duke is going to have a chance to play Carolina and Miami in the next 2 weeks. So they can go and snatch that front runner title and go into November with a chance to win the division, which is just, I mean, I don't know. Like, there's been a lot that's played out to get them to that point. I'm not entirely sure we know all of it, but that's incredible to be saying at this point in the year.
Nobody thought we'd get here, and yet here we are talking about kind of these crazy scenarios that could legit be in play. And it starts with the game tomorrow in Atlanta, Georgia, Duke and Georgia Tech on the gridiron. All right, we'll take our final break here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils and wrap things up with Conor O'Neill here in just a moment. Make your second listen of the day and second watch be Locked On ACC. Get more on the conference every day as host Candace Cooper and local experts of Locked On, like myself, take you across the conference in 30 minutes. We've mentioned a lot of great games coming up this weekend. Duke versus Georgia Tech, North Carolina versus Miami. We're previewing all of that action over on Locked On ACC. Make Locked On ACC your second listen of the day. Final few moments here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson alongside Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated. Let's talk about your work, the website, devilsillustrated.com. What can folks find over there, Conor?
Well, depending on when they listen to this, there is coming, or there already is, a story previewing tomorrow's game. And there's basketball coverage, right? We got a Jeremy Roach feature about the freshmen kind of settling in and how that was a process that started over the summer and is really kind of coming into full focus now that practices started last week.
Duke men's basketball made it official. They announced that Jeremy Roach was going to be the team captain for this upcoming season. We've got ACC tip-off coming up next week in Charlotte as well. So basketball season's going to be here before we know it. You mentioned the profile there at Devils Illustrated on Jeremy Roach, and these freshmen, boy, what an impact they're going to have for this team. But on Jeremy Roach in particular, I think one of the bigger questions is whether or not this guy can be the guard we saw in the NCAA tournament for Duke this upcoming season.
Yeah, that was one of the things I dove into with the profile. It's talking about he's really close with Emil Jefferson, which I didn't know before media day last week, and they kind of explained it, both of them. They're kind of kindred spirits in the same way that they're both gym rats. Like, Jeremy Roach is texting Emil at all hours of the day or night, whether he can get some extra shots up and whether Emil can come rebound and work with him. And that was going on last year. And so it was really interesting. It was really rewarding to listen to Emil talk about working with Jeremy throughout the year and kind of, we don't have to beat around the bush. Jeremy was not the same player he was all season that he was in the last month. And so seeing everything come to fruition at the end of the year like that, it's great, but you also want that to continue and you want it to improve going into this year. Like, Duke needs him to be that type of player or better. They need him to be a leader throughout the season, not just for one magical March run. So the work ethic, the kind of the gym rat Ness, if you can throw Ness on the end of that. That's what they'll lean on to kind of get Jeremy to lead these guys. Nobody's looking at him and saying he's got to be a 20-point a game scorer. I don't even know if you would handicap it as he's going to be the front runner to be Duke's leading scorer, but he has to be Duke's most important player. He has to be the player with the ball in his hands, directing the offense in late game situations, and then getting Duke into their offensive sets and that kind of thing. So yeah, that he's not just a key cog this year. He is the key cog to me, at least before we find out which freshmen are really going to take over and kind of be the ones that control the game.
Congrats to Jeremy Roach. What an honor it is to be a Duke men's basketball captain, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the year that he can have. We'll have plenty more basketball thoughts and conversations, in particular with you as well, Conor, in the coming weeks as the season approaches and this football season continues to move along as well. Thank you once again for coming on Locked On Blue Devils today, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's my good pal, Conor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Conor O'Neill _DI and check out Devils Illustrated. Get a subscription there with the Rivals Network. Great coverage of Duke Blue Devils athletics. That wraps up yet another show, yet another week here on Locked On Blue Devils. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. Please follow and subscribe to this podcast for free as well, wherever you get your podcasts. My name is JJ Jackson. I'll talk to you on Monday. Thank you and good day.